Good afternoon and welcome to the December CCSQ DNA Town Hall. For those of you who are new, these calls are designed to provide you with updates, announcements, and training demos related to the CDR, SAS Viya, Databricks, and more. Okay, before we get started, let's cover some quick administrative announcements. Please stay muted during the call. If you have any questions, please put them in the Zoom chat for us to answer during the Q&A. Lastly, we're recording today's call and we'll make sure the meeting materials are available on the Confluence space after the town hall. Let's cover our agenda. Today, so we're going to kick things off with the monthly satisfaction survey review in full. Then we have some data camp review of materials and our poll for that as well. Then we're going to move on to the Emari decommission, DNA portal, and then finally we'll wrap things up with our Q&A portion. Okay, so next I'm going to kick things over to Nicole.
Thanks, Julia. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Dilger, and I am the product owner for our user services team. The satisfaction results that I'm going to be sharing were collected during data camp. If you participated in the survey during data camp, you would have noticed we had some updated questions to allow for more feedback. I wanted to thank those of you who took the time to provide feedback and kudos and concerns and suggestions. We received a lot of suggestions pertaining to Databricks training, and I'm happy to announce that we have 3 new trainings that are available on the Training Hub under the Databricks tab. So if you haven't seen those yet, you'll definitely want to take a look. And we are also working on adding 2 more trainings in the coming weeks. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the results. The first one here is, how satisfied are you with the performance and uptime of the CCSQ DNA environment? So as a reminder, the results that we're looking at, we took those during data camp, and so those are marked on here as October. In terms of responses, we had 82 responses, 45 satisfied, 10 neutral, 16 dissatisfied, and 11 as NA. In terms of percentage, that went out to 55% satisfied, 12% neutral, 20% dissatisfied, and 13% as NA. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. How satisfied are you with the support you receive from the help desk in addressing your questions or issues with the CCSQ DNA environment? Once again, we had 82, 37 satisfied, 16 neutral, 12 dissatisfied, and 17 NA. In terms of percentages, that's 45% satisfied, 20% neutral, 15% dissatisfied, and 21% NA. You'll go ahead and go to the next slide. How satisfied are you with the resources available from CCSQ data and analytics? So we had 42% satisfied, 21 neutral, 11 dissatisfied, and 8 NA. That went out to 51% satisfied, 26% neutral, 13% dissatisfied, and 10% NA. So before we start the poll for today, this is just a reminder that if you are not a direct user with CCSQ data and analytics, we ask that you refrain from taking the survey. During these last results, we saw a lot of NA. So we just ask that if you cannot provide feedback or would select NA, to refrain from taking the survey. Additionally, so that we have a targeted time frame for these metrics, we would like you to consider your ratings for the month of November. So as you're doing this poll, if you could consider the month of November, November 1st through 30th, that helps us to have a targeted timeline for these results. And Julia, do you want me to cover this slide here?
Sure, you can.
Okay. So for anyone that may be new, this survey helps us know how we can improve your experience within the CCSQ DNA environment and community. In a moment, a Zoom poll will pop up on your screen, and you'll have 5 to 6 minutes to answer these questions. You want to make sure to scroll down to see all the questions. obviously complete the questions relevant to you and then hit submit to lock in your answers. After the time is up, the poll will be closed, and then obviously those results will be used to improve our tools, trainings, and offerings. And you should be seeing the poll now. If you can go ahead and go through those questions and answer to the best of your ability, that would be fantastic. Thank you for your participation.
So we're about a minute in. Just a reminder to scroll all the way down and make sure that you're answering all of the questions. We're about halfway through our time. Take about one more minute to wrap up. I see a few folks still on the last two questions, so just take maybe 30 more seconds to wrap up. Ten more seconds. Thank you so much for your participation. Okay, so next we're going to be reviewing, I'm Julia MD. I'm on PM32. I'm a communication specialist. We're going to be reviewing our data camp information and materials. So our data camp was November 15th and 16th. If you are unable to join, or if you're able to join, all of the materials and session recordings are now available and updated in our Confluence space. In addition, the notebooks for the sessions with demos are available with directions about how to access them in that space as well. So we just wanted to include that link here, so they're there for your review. Now I'm going to be sharing a video with our data camp survey results, and so we can hear what our community had to say about our event. So we just want to say thank you to everyone who participated, and we'll be sure to keep that feedback in mind for our next data camp when planning. Okay, so now I'm bringing it back to Nicole for Emari decommission updates.
Thanks, Julia. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so what we're going to be covering here is obviously reiterating the Emari decommission date, which is December 31st. We have been setting up office hours to help organizations that are having migration issues. Just want to thank everyone that has already gone through office hours, who submitted questions in advance of office hours. And so for anyone that may still need to sign up for office hours, we will obviously be providing the link. You should also have that link in your email from communications that we have been recently sending out. And the option to sign up for office hours are on that Confluence page. And just once again, want to thank everyone that has been attending and participating in those office hours. We also have some training resources that we have linked here. We have some Databricks knowledge base articles, and of course, what I talked about earlier, the Databricks Training Hub, where we do have 3 new trainings posted there. And then I'm going to pass over this kudos to the DVA team to Alicia.
Hi, everyone. I want to pass along a special kudos to the DVA team for the work they've been doing on the decommission of Emari within their group. They had about 900 or so programs that they needed to convert, and they're about 95% complete. So they've done a ton of that work. They started that work about 4 to 5 months ago. So it's a large effort, but they've been diligently working through it and working with our team as necessary to get to that 95% rate. So just wanted to pass along a special kudos to them for all the hard work and around the Emari decommission.
Awesome. And then the next part here is we are actually going to be receiving a demo from Derek pertaining to the macro that was created to convert SAS files to Databricks. So I'm going to pass it over to Derek.
Thanks, Nicole. You got to excuse me, I'm getting a cold. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the new macro that we've created to get around the performance issues and a lot of the errors that users were running into in regards to writing SAS data out to Hive through the ODBC driver that is connecting SAS to the new Databricks SQL cluster. We've developed a new macro that can be utilized. We do have documentation out on Confluence page, specifically around how to use the new macro and when we recommend to use the new macro. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that, and if it would be okay, I could share my screen. Okay, so the new macro is what we talked about. It's this write large SAS file to DBX, and it has about 5 different parameters that users will need to fill out when you go to call the macro. The first parameter is going to be the input library where the file exists. If it's a SAS data set that is written to SAS work, all you have to do is just type in the work library there. The input file parameter is going to be the name of the SAS data set that you're wanting to write out. Output schema is just simply the output Hive database or schema that you're wanting to write the new Hive table in. The output file is going to be the name of that new Hive table, and then your DBX group that you want to use to connect. One thing to note is that if there are any dates, date time, or time fields that are formatted in your SAS data set, you want to make sure that they actually have proper formats. If you do not have them formatted and it's just the raw values, which I believe with each of these on the SAS side is the number of days or the number of days and seconds from a specific date and date time in the past. And so if you don't have those formatted, the way this macro is going to read them is as a numeric value, and it'll assign it as a double data type within the Hive table. If they have some sort of a proper format applied to them, then it will be able to be read correctly as the actual underlying value. Another thing to note is that you will need to have write access to the data set that you're trying to write to a Hive table. And the reason for this is because we are modifying the date, time, and time formats within that data set. None of the values are changing, just the formats are changing. And the reason why we're modifying it to the data set is so that it is only processing that file once and not having to process it and read the file more than just a single time. It's again, a simple proc dataset statement to modify those formats back to a specific format that you may want in the dataset, and it runs very quickly because with a proc dataset statement, it's not actually processing and reading the individual observations one at a time like it would be if you're using a data step. So just so everyone is aware that that is happening, so that those underlying values are formatted correctly and they're able to be read and inserted into the Hive table on the back end side appropriately, versus trying to set Friday, as a data type in the table. Another thing that we recommend doing is if your file that you're trying to write is around 30 megabytes or less, it actually will probably be quicker to do the standard method of using the dbxlib macro, create an implicit connection, and doing a simple data step to write the table, the data set out. Again, until Emari is fully decommissioned, we do have that conversion issue with date, time, and times. So we do still need to run this db type equals option, set those types of formats to be string, and then you can cast them back or convert them back to whatever date, time, or timestamp they need to be on the Hive side. The reason why we recommend on the smaller files to not use this macro is because it does take and utilize Databricks job clusters that are occurring on the back end that we're calling and trying to spin up. And it typically takes around 2 minutes or so for that job cluster to spin up and become available for the back end to then process the data that we're passing to load it into a Hive table and register the metadata. I can demonstrate kind of how this works. This is just a tiny data set that I'm going to create here with 1,000 observations, and it's going to have a list of a lot of different types of formats that we are sending to the Hive table. As you can see here, it's a lot of random formats and dates and date times and all that good stuff. And so this is a work data set that's being stored in the SAS work library. As you can see here, I'm simply calling it from the work library in the name of the data set, and I'm putting it out to our own schema, calling it Derek Test Delete Me, and using our Databricks group. And it's always, again, recommended that you drop the table before you're trying to write to it so that it doesn't come back and throw an error. But executing this, like I said, it will take at least a couple of minutes for that back end job cluster to spin up. And what it's doing on the back end here is SAS is basically utilizing some API calls to the Databricks job cluster, and we have it looping through to make that API call to determine whether or not the job cluster is finished. If it's not finished, it's putting SAS to sleep for a little bit, and then it'll go back up, check and see if the job cluster is finished. If it isn't, it'll sleep, and it'll continue to do that. Once it does identify the job cluster is finished and the table is ran, it'll continue through the rest of the macro where it's going to run a show row counts statement on your table to identify that the table was created successfully, and it'll output the size and number of observations of the table as well as the date and time that the table was created. This is a good way to be able to pass data sets that are very large in volume. We've been able to pass very large data sets, millions, hundreds of millions, even a billion or so observations, and it takes relatively the same amount of time, if not a little bit faster than what it was doing on the Emari side. But again, it's going to be dependent on that size of file that you are wanting to write out to Hive and when you want to utilize this specific macro, because it will be faster doing it the other way if it's a small enough data set rather than just using this macro every single time. One other piece to note is that if you are using code where you do have implicit connections where you're reading a Hive table in your set statement, and then your data step is writing back to the Hive table with large amounts of data, and again, with temporarily when that data has dates, date times, and times formats, you are going to want to take different approach where instead of simply creating it here with this library connection, where you can see I'm processing that Hive table on the SAS side, reading it, and then outputting it back to a Hive table. If it is a large enough data set, this is no longer going to work as well as efficiently. It's going to take a lot longer. So we recommend breaking that up into 3 separate steps, where you are using a select data set macro to read that Hive table into a temporary data set, do whatever processing you're needing to do on that table within the SAS side, and then you can execute the new macro to write it back out to the Hive schema and table that you are wanting to write it back to. Again, not to say that this functionality is not available. It is most certainly still available. It's just that until Emari is gone, you still have the DB type equals option that you will need to utilize. And depending on the size of the file that you're using, it may be a lot faster and more efficient approach of taking it and breaking up into these 3 separate steps rather than trying to do it in 2 steps that you're doing here. So flipping back to here, you can see it's still waiting to process. One other thing to note while it's still processing and writing on the back end side is that we do have a new macro that we are deploying to production and have documentation around, which is essentially the very exact same thing we're doing with this CAS macro or CAS macro. However, the new one is specific to CAS. If you have a CAS table that you want to write back out to your Hive schema in a new Hive table, you will not be able to do that through the standard methods that you are able to with your CAS lib being connected to the Hadoop and Emari server. You will need to use this new CAS macro to write an in-memory CAS table out to an actual Hive table within your Hive schema each and every time you want to write it out. That is because the version of SAS we were on does not allow us to modify the encoding of the data in the CAS table to be able to be read appropriately. So we have to go around it. And again, we will have documentation publicly published, and we'll send out communications regarding how to use that macro on the CAS side. And it's very, very similar to what this macro is doing, except it's not processing a SAS data set, it's just simply processing a CAS table. As you can see here, it's now finished executing and running, and we were able to identify that the table was written successfully, and we can check it on the Databricks side. We are still continuing to work through specific exception handling on the back end to be able to print better exceptions and error messages that are that may be happening on the back end Databricks side. So if you are running into issues with trying to run this macro where the table's not being written successfully and it's not showing up with observation counts, please go ahead and submit a help desk ticket, and we can easily look at that on the Databricks side to determine what is causing that issue. We can and get it resolved and corrected so that it writes it out successfully moving forward.
Thanks, Derek. Okay, so next I'm going to pass it over to Miriam for DNA portal updates.
Hi, I'm Mary Mabara, the product owner for the portal team. If you want to go to the next slide. So as you're aware, we were able to launch Portal on December 1st. We had a successful launch for the authenticated side of Portal. Our focus now is around the public side, and then to plan ahead, we're looking at various self-service options that could potentially be beneficial and help in your day-to-day tasks. So we have 6 areas as of now that we're looking into and researching. And I'm going to take just a couple minutes to explain what these 6 are that we're researching. So the first one being the data object or file permission management. So this is going to look into providing the ability to set permissions around folders or files. An example of this is just setting the file to read only. The next area that we're looking at is around data archiving and retrieval. Currently, the data is automatically archived at 13 months. This self-service feature would allow for you to archive a file prior to the 13 months, but it will also allow the files to be restored that have already been archived after the 13-month time frame. The third option or area that we're looking at is file restoration. So this will allow files to be restored in the situation that maybe they were inadvertently deleted. We would be able to bring that file back for you. The fourth area is around the Databricks cluster management. Currently, the cluster sizes are set to 32 gigs. This feature would allow you to submit a request for a larger cluster size. Sorry, it'll allow you to submit a request for the larger cluster size if needed past the 32 gigs. The fifth one is around access to saved or favorited programming libraries. So instead of having to apply your libraries each time you start your notebook, this option would provide the ability to submit a feature or request so that you can have that library saved or pinned at the cluster level. And then with the last one, data sharing, this option is going to provide the ability to create shared schemas or workbenches with other organizations and to also set permissions around that data. So with that, we wanted to kind of give you a brief overview of what each of those 6 features are, because with the next slide, what we're looking at asking you for your help on is filling out a survey around a couple questions. One around the frequency of how you would use these 6 areas, and then ranking them what's most critical that you would like to see on a scale of 1 to 6. And then the final question is just an open field. So if there's something that we haven't listed with the 6 that we just discussed, that open field is there for you to provide any kind of other self-service options that you would like to see come to Portal that would be beneficial to your work. So I just want to thank you in advance for participating in the survey, because we want to make sure that we're bringing you the most value to your day-to-day activities. I believe it's going to pop up like the previous survey as well.
You should see it on your screen at this point.
I see it.
Thanks.
Julia, can you flip back one slide so they can see the features?
I'm not sure if Miriam already mentioned this, but we'll have 5 to 6 minutes to complete the survey, and I'll give kind of updates throughout for how much time is remaining. For the ranking question, we did have a question for the rank interest 1 to 6, which number means the lowest or highest. Reese responded that 1 would be your first choice. So like that's my number 1, would get the number 1. We're a little over halfway through our time. Just a reminder to scroll all the way down to make sure you're seeing all of those questions. We have about a minute remaining. Thirty more seconds. Ten seconds. Thank you so much for your participation. Okay, so at this point, we're going to move to our Q&A. We did get a few questions, and I think they're primarily for Derek. And then obviously, if you have any other questions in the interim, you can definitely still place those in the chat. And any we don't get to or need further clarification, they'll be answered in our Confluence space when the Q&A is published after our town hall. So the first question, the transfer still defaults all character variables to 255 in terms of length. Is that correct?
Yeah, so when reading data into SAS from Hive, the ODBC driver currently is defaulting to 255 on anything that's var, car, or string type. I'm actually working right now on testing a configuration that Databricks team gave me to test to determine if that configuration will resolve that issue. We are also working on adding a couple of additional things we can do by adding a new parameter to the selected dataset macro that will allow users to be able to pass specific lengths and formats to the dataset that you're writing to. So this is a known issue. We are working in parallel around, with a few different things to try and get it resolved and to create workarounds for it at this time. And hopefully what I'm testing is in the next 15 minutes will resolve the issue. So.
Okay, our next question. Can you go through the process code changes needed to write a table from CastLib to our Hive schema? Do you want me to repeat it again?
Yeah, I'll read it. Go
Okay.
through the process code changes needed to write a table from a CastLib to our Hive schema. Yes, I would recommend that you sign up for our office hours that we have every day around the Emari decommissioning, and we can walk you through this new macro that you'll utilize in order to write out an in-memory CAS table that exists in a CastLib to a Hive table within the schema that it exists. But yeah, you will have to use this new macro. And like I said, there will be documentation around the macro as well that will be out there for you to take a look at, but certainly don't hesitate to sign up for some of the office hours if you have additional questions or concerns.
Do you have an example to create a new schema and a new data table in Databricks?
So you won't be able to create a new schema. That if you're needing a new schema, for whatever reason, that would have to come through a data access request form to basically kind of lay out what you're needing and why you would need it. But as far as creating a new table within an existing schema, that can be done with Databricks Notebook, whether you're using SQL language or Python with PySpark. And there's plenty of examples in the notebooks that are out there and available to everybody with read access onto Databricks that were demoed during a data camp.
Okay, will data in our workbench schema or both be archived after 13 months?
I can answer this one. So I put the answer in the chat, but it's basically after they haven't been accessed for at least 13 months. So it's not from the create date, but the last time the object was accessed, and it is object level. So not just a full workbench or a full schema. It's going to be the last time those things were modified. The portal feature will allow direct retrieval. However, it is important to know that there are timings around how fast that can be stored that are just AWS times. More information that would be provided once we get to that point. We're not at the point of actually archiving anything to deep storage yet. Additionally, there's a question about, will simple reads such as proc contents in SAS Viya be considered an access that will reset the 13-month archive timeline for a given data set? I think it would, but we would definitely want to test it to make sure. So, accessing a file, opening that file, I believe would set a timestamp on it that would obviously have a newer access date, but we definitely have to test that a bit deeper.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. And then multiple members of our team have Databricks and or Viya roles in Heart, but cannot access the DNA portal. What would the next steps be to gain access?
Submit a help desk ticket, especially if there's no one from your group being able to access. That means that there's something maybe incorrect with the org setup.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. At this point, that's our last question. Any questions that needed further clarification or that are submitted after? Oh, sorry. Okay, just making sure. Will be answered in our Q&A portion in our Confluence space. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. All of today's meeting materials and slides will be in the recording, and the Q&A will be are available on our Confluence space shortly. Upcoming events, January 5th, we have a maintenance event at 8 p.m. and January 24th, our town hall is planned for at 1 p.m. So this is our last one of the year. So thank you so much for your participation. Thank you to our speakers for presenting today. And if you have any questions or issues in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to us via Slack or email. Thanks so much.
Thank you.